In the parched heart of West Texas, where the sun beats down on the land and the wind whips dust across gravel roads, lives Jack Turner, a solitary 45-year-old rancher with calloused hands and eyes filled with untold stories. His property lies a few miles from Amarillo, amidst cotton fields struggling against the drought. One late September afternoon, returning from buying supplies in town, Jack heard muffled screams coming from the small, faded blue wooden house of Mary Collins, his 38-year-old neighbor. She was known for hiding bruises under long-sleeved dresses, even in the suffocating 104-degree heat. Jack dismounted his bay horse, took a deep breath of the dry, dusty air, and crossed the creaking threshold, his voice firm. This ends today. The orange sky of dusk bore witness to the moment that would change 2 lives forever in the Texas countryside. What Jack found inside the house was a scene that wounded more deeply than any desert sandstorm. Floral china plates shattered across the wooden floor, the acrid smell of burnt coffee mingling with sweat and fear in the stuffy air, and Mary cowering in a kitchen corner, her yellow dress torn at the shoulder. Rick Collins, her 42-year-old husband, stood over her, his face flushed with alcohol and rage, clutching an empty whiskey bottle as he screamed obscenities. Jack knew this type of man well, a local oil refinery worker who unleashed life's frustrations on the nearest person. In rural Texas, neighbors rarely interfere in family matters, but Jack also knew that silence came at too high a price. His unexpected presence at the door ignited the abuser's even greater wrath, and tension spread through the small room like the suffocating heat of a West Texas midday. Between the clenching of fists and the ominous creaking of floorboards under Rick's heavy feet, Jack had to make a decision that would define the rest of his life. How far was he willing to go to protect Mary Collins? He had no wife or children, only the painful memory of Sarah, his younger sister, whom he lost to domestic violence 15 years ago in Dallas, and whom he could never save. The argument between the two men quickly escalated into a physical confrontation when Rick lunged forward with the broken bottle in his hand, and each dragging second seemed to last an eternity, like a life-or-death duel in the Old West. Mary remained motionless in the corner, trembling with fear and shock. Outside the dusty window, the Texas sky began to darken with heavy, ominous clouds, bringing with them the unmistakable and rare scent of rain to those parched lands, as if nature itself sensed the change that was coming to that small house lost in the middle of nowhere. The confrontation ended with Rick on the kitchen floor, unconscious but breathing, while Jack carefully helped Mary to her feet, noting the purple bruises on her thin arms. Without unnecessary words, for in Texas actions speak louder than empty promises, Jack retrieved the small brown leather suitcase Mary kept under the couple's bed and helped her gather her few clothes and personal belongings. The rain began to fall outside, first in sparse drops hitting the rusted tin roof, then in harder downpours that made the whole house vibrate. Jack called the town sheriff using the old kitchen phone and with few words explained the situation. Mary watched through the window as the first puddles of mud formed in the dirt yard, knowing her life was changing forever. Jack didn't give long speeches or make grand promises. He simply looked into her frightened eyes and said with the conviction of someone who knows the weight of words, "You're not alone now, Mary. That much I promise." Mary temporarily moved into the guest house on Jack's property, a simple but clean building with white walls and blue curtains his late mother had sewn. In the following weeks, as legal proceedings against Rick unfolded in the Amarillo courthouse, Jack and Mary developed a quiet but comforting routine. He tended to the animals and cotton crop at dawn. She prepared strong coffee and scrambled eggs in the small kitchen. On hot afternoons, they sat on the wooden porch to watch the orange sunset, paint the endless Texas horizon, talking about future plans. Perhaps she could work at the local school as a teacher, a profession she held before her marriage. Jack discovered that Mary had a beautiful smile when she didn't have to hide it behind fear, and she realized that there were men capable of protecting instead of destroying. That night's rain was just the beginning of a more generous season for that arid region, bringing hope where before there had only been resignation and pain. 6 months later, on a sunny spring Sunday, Jack and Mary married in a simple ceremony at the small white wooden Baptist church in downtown Amarillo, with only a few neighbors as witnesses. She wore a light blue sleeveless dress, showing her unbruised arms for the first time, and he wore his best dark suit, kept in the closet for years. The local pastor, a kind man with greying hair, spoke of second chances and the courage to start over when all seemed lost. Rick had been convicted and was serving time in a state penitentiary, and Mary could finally sleep in peace knowing she was safe. At the simple reception in the churchyard, with country music playing on an old radio and cold lemonade served in glass cups, Jack whispered to his wife, "Sometimes all it takes is one brave sentence to change two people's destiny." Mary smiled and replied, "And sometimes all it takes is one good man to show that true love still exists." The Texas sun shone brightly on the new couple, promising better days in a land that had finally learned to bloom again after the storm. 2 years after their marriage, life on the Turner Ranch had found its natural rhythm under the relentless Texas sun. Mary woke before dawn to make coffee, while Jack milked the dairy cows in the faded red wooden barn. Their simple but fulfilling routine included tending the garden of tomatoes and peppers she had planted behind the house, while he mended fences and irrigated the cotton fields that were finally starting to yield a profit after difficult years. On hot afternoons, when the thermometer read over 95 degrees, they sought refuge in the shade of the porch to drink iced tea and plan improvements to the property. Mary had found a job as a teacher at the local elementary school, teaching children from 6 to 10 years old, and felt fulfilled seeing her young students learn to read and write. Jack watched with pride as his wife blossomed each day, regaining the self-esteem and joy of living that Rick had tried to destroy during years of abusive marriage. The couple's tranquility was shattered one October morning when Jack found strange footprints around the house and tire marks on the dirt road leading to the property. Mary noticed that someone had tampered with the mailbox and that one of the living room curtains was slightly misaligned, as if someone had been peeking through the window during the night. The news that arrived via Sheriff Thompson that afternoon confirmed their worst fears. Rick Collins had been released from prison for good behavior 6 months earlier than expected, and no one knew his current whereabouts. The officer, a robust man with a grey mustache, warned the couple to be vigilant and promised to increase patrols in the area. Jack immediately reinforced the house's locks, installed motion sensor lights around the property, and began carrying his 12-gauge shotgun whenever he went to work in the distant fields. Mary felt the old fear returning to her chest, but this time she wasn't alone to face it. For 3 tense weeks, the couple lived in a constant state of alert, checking windows and doors multiple times before bed and avoiding leaving the property after dark. Jack organized a system with their closest neighbors to communicate via light signals in case of emergency, reminiscent of old times when rural communities needed to protect each other. Mary continued teaching, but Jack always accompanied her to school in his 1995 blue Ford pickup and picked her up in the late afternoon, never leaving her alone for too long. The tension was palpable during meals, when they spoke in low voices about safety plans as the autumn wind rustled the kitchen curtains. One night, the property dogs, 2 German shepherds named Duke and Ranger, began barking furiously around 2 in the morning, waking the couple with pounding hearts. Jack grabbed his shotgun and went to investigate, finding only overturned trash cans that could have been the work of raccoons or someone more sinister, testing their defenses. The inevitable confrontation happened on a cold November night, when Jack was fixing the well's water pump at the back of the property and Mary was preparing dinner in the lit kitchen. Rick suddenly appeared at the back door, thinner and with bloodshot eyes from months in prison, wielding a hunting knife and demanding that Mary return with him home, where a wife belongs. She slowly backed toward the drawer where Jack kept a .38 caliber revolver for emergencies, keeping her hands visible as she tried to calm her ex-husband with soft words. "Rick, you're violating the restraining order," she said with a trembling but firm voice. "The sheriff will be here any minute." He laughed bitterly and replied that he had nothing left to lose, advancing through the kitchen as he knocked over chairs and threatened to stab her if she didn't obey immediately. The sound of falling objects alerted Jack, who abandoned his tools and ran toward the house, hearing Mary's screams echoing through the starry Texas night. Jack burst through the front door with his shotgun raised, finding Rick holding Mary by the arm, pressing the blade against her neck in front of the lit gas stove. "Let her go now, Rick," Jack said in a controlled voice, but loaded with authority, aiming carefully so as not to accidentally hit his wife. "This is the last time I'll ask." Rick screamed that Mary was his property and that he'd rather see her dead than live with another man. But Jack could sense the desperation behind the bravado. The man was clearly under the influence of drugs or alcohol and was visibly shaking. Mary managed to make eye contact with her husband and imperceptibly pointed to the pot of boiling water on the stove beside her. Jack understood the signal and began to move slowly to the side, forcing Rick to rotate and slightly loosen his grip on Mary. At the exact moment she ducked down, Jack fired a warning shot at the ceiling, and Mary threw the boiling water on Rick's arm, who screamed in pain and dropped the knife. Jack immediately restrained him, holding him on the floor until the police arrived 15 minutes later, when the sirens finally cut through the silence of the Texas dawn. 5 years have passed since that terrible night, and the Turner Ranch prospered under more serene West Texas skies. Mary had become the local school principal, and Jack had expanded his cattle ranching, becoming respected in the community as the man who had the courage to intervene when no one else would. Rick was serving a 20-year sentence for violating a restraining order, attempted murder, and illegal weapons possession, and this time there would be no parole. On a golden spring afternoon, as they watched their 2-year-old son Tommy run around the yard chasing chickens, Mary took Jack's calloused hand and whispered, "You saved 2 lives that night. Mine and our son's, who didn't even exist yet." Jack smiled, adjusted his cowboy hat, and replied, "Sometimes a man has to make a decision that defines who he truly is." The gentle Texas wind carried the scent of wildflowers Mary had planted along the property fence, and for the first time in many years, both could imagine a future without fear, built on the solid foundation of true love and the courage to do what is right. 10 years had passed since that night that changed everything, and the Turner Ranch had become a symbol of hope in the rural community of Amarillo. Tommy, now 7, ran through the cotton fields with his dogs, while Mary, at 48, directed a support program for women victims of domestic violence at the local church. Jack, 55, with a few gray hairs in his beard, had become a mentor to young ranchers in the region, teaching sustainable farming techniques. The property prospered with 300 head of cattle, green fields irrigated by a modern system, and an expanded house with 3 bedrooms, painted white with blue accents. On summer afternoons, when the Texas heat reached 104 degrees, the family gathered on the covered porch to drink iced lemonade while Tommy practiced reading aloud. Mary watched her husband repair equipment with the same hands that had protected her years ago, feeling grateful for every peaceful day they had won together in that arid but generous land. The peaceful routine was broken one September morning when Sheriff Thompson appeared at the property with disturbing news. Rick Collins had died in a prison fight, stabbed by another inmate during a yard dispute. Mary received the information with mixed feelings, relief at knowing she would never again have to look over her shoulder, but also a strange melancholy for the man Rick could have been if he had chosen a different path. Jack held his wife's hand as she processed the news, knowing that even after so many years, deep scars still ached on cloudy days. Tommy played in the yard, oblivious to the adults' serious conversation, chasing butterflies among the flowers his mother lovingly tended. "Does this mean it's truly over?" Mary asked in a low voice. Sheriff Thompson, now with completely white hair, nodded gravely. "It's over, Mary. You're free forever." Jack hugged his wife tighter, feeling an invisible weight finally lift from his shoulders after carrying it for a decade. That night, after putting Tommy to bed with a story about brave cowboys, Jack and Mary sat on the porch under a starry sky, typical of rural Texas, where light pollution doesn't obscure the Milky Way. For the first time in years, Mary cried, not from fear or sadness, but from a profound, trembling relief. "I never managed to fully forgive him," she admitted, wiping tears with the back of her hand. "And I don't know if that makes me a bad person." Jack slowly shook his head, choosing his words carefully. "Forgiveness isn't about him, Mary. It's about you not carrying that anger in your heart anymore." They remained silent for long minutes, listening to the crickets chirping and the gentle wind rustling the branches of the century-old oak in the yard. Mary rested her head on her husband's shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for teaching me that it's possible to start over, even when it seems like all is lost." Jack kissed the top of her head and replied, "We taught each other that, one day at a time." The following months brought a new lightness to the Turner family, as if a decade-long storm had finally passed, leaving the air purer. Mary expanded her support program, transforming the renovated barn into a temporary shelter for women at risk, funded by community donations and a small state grant. Jack built a recreation area for the children who accompanied their mothers, with swings made of ropes and old tires hanging from the large tree in the yard. Tommy, now 8, helped his mother organize donated toys and spoke naturally with the frightened children who arrived in the middle of the night. The project became known throughout the region as Hope House, and Mary received weekly calls from social workers requesting spots for desperate women. During planning meetings in the living room, illuminated by the golden light of the Texas sunset, Mary felt that her old pain had transformed into purpose, helping other women find the same path to freedom that Jack had shown her. The following spring, the community organized a 10-year wedding anniversary party for Jack and Mary at the Baptist Church Hall, decorated with wildflowers picked from the region's fields. Over 100 people attended, including women Mary had helped over the years, some already remarried, others focused on careers and children. Pastor Johnson, the former minister's successor, gave an emotional speech about how true love can bloom even in the most arid land, using the metaphor of storms that bring necessary rain for growth. Tommy, dressed in a dress shirt and bow tie, read a poem he had written at school about brave parents who protect their families. During the slow waltz to soft country music, Mary whispered in Jack's ear, "Do you remember when you said sometimes all it takes is one sentence to change someone's destiny?" Jack smiled, gently twirling her under the colorful lights strung from the ceiling. "And you showed me that sometimes that sentence turns into a lifetime of beautiful sentences." The party continued late into the night, with laughter echoing through the starry Texas night. 15 years after speaking the words that changed 2 lives forever, Jack Turner became a local legend, not for what he said, but for what he consistently did every day thereafter. Mary, now recognized by the state as an advocate for women's rights, received invitations to lecture at universities nationwide on overcoming adversity and new beginnings. Tommy grew up strong and kind, learning early on that true masculinity means protecting and caring, not dominating and controlling. The ranch continued to prosper, but its greatest treasure was the letters of gratitude that arrived monthly from women who found the courage to leave abusive relationships after hearing Mary's story. During a particularly golden autumn sunset, while watching a new refugee family settle into the shelter, Mary held Jack's wrinkled hand and said, "That sentence you spoke didn't just save one life. It saved dozens." Jack, now with completely grey hair but still firm eyes, replied, "And all of them saved a little bit of us too." The gentle Texas wind carried the scent of the last flowers of the year, promising that even in the coldest winters, spring always returns for those who have the courage to wait and fight for it. 20 years had passed since that afternoon that divided Jack Turner's life into before and after, and the ranch had become a true sanctuary in the heart of Texas. Mary, at 58, directed a statewide network of support houses spanning 12 cities, inspired by the pioneering model she created in Amarillo. Jack, at 65 and retired from active farming, dedicated his time to lecturing in rural schools on domestic violence prevention, always accompanied by Tommy, now 17 and captain of the high school football team. The original property had become a training center, where men learned to recognize signs of abusive behavior and develop healthy relationships. On cool Texas winter mornings, when the thermometer read only 50 degrees, Jack walked through the fields where it all began, remembering how a single courageous decision could echo through the decades. The Real Men program, which he had developed with local psychologists, had already trained over 500 participants in nonviolent communication techniques. Tommy grew up hearing stories about courage and protection, and at 17, he was preparing to study law at the University of Texas, dreaming of specializing in defending victims of domestic violence. On summer nights, when the family gathered on the expanded porch of the renovated house, he questioned his parents about details of those difficult early years absorbing lessons that shaped his worldview. Mary watched her son with pride, seeing in him his father's kindness combined with a fierce determination to make a difference in the world. "Someday, I want to help families like you, helped our community," Tommy would say, as he helped his father fix fences on weekends. Jack taught his son that true strength is not in muscles, but in the courage to intervene when someone needs protection. On hot afternoons, when they worked together in the barn caring for the therapy horses Mary used in the emotional rehabilitation program, father and son talked about responsibility, integrity, and the transformative power of unconditional love. The unexpected arrival of a young woman named Sarah Martinez, just 19 years old, brought painful memories to the surface on a grey March morning. She arrived at the shelter with a 3-month-old baby in her arms and fresh bruises on her face, fleeing a violent boyfriend who threatened to kill her if she tried to leave him. Mary immediately recognized the terror in the girl's eyes, the same terror she herself had carried for years before Jack intervened in her life. Sarah trembled uncontrollably as she told her story in the counseling room, decorated with plants and inspiring photographs of women who had overcome similar traumas. "He said if I tell anyone, he'll find me and kill my son too," Sarah whispered, cradling the baby against her chest. Jack, watching from the doorway, felt familiar anger rise in his chest, the same he had felt 20 years earlier, seeing Mary cowering in that shattered kitchen. Mary held the young woman's trembling hands and said with maternal firmness, "You are safe here, Sarah, and we will help you build a new life where no one will ever hurt you or your baby again." In the following months, Sarah became part of the Turners' extended family, living in one of the support houses built on the expanded property and slowly regaining self-confidence with the help of specialized therapy. Tommy, in his senior year of high school, voluntarily cared for Sarah's baby in the afternoons, developing a special bond that made him think about responsible fatherhood. Jack built a safe playground where Sarah could let her son play without fear, surrounded by security cameras and 24-hour monitoring. Mary worked tirelessly with lawyers to secure a permanent restraining order against Sarah's ex-boyfriend, who was arrested after violating the protective order 3 times. During group therapy sessions in the main room of the center, lit by large windows that let in the golden Texas light, Sarah heard stories from other survivors and gradually found her own voice. "How you saved me," she said one afternoon, holding her son who was playing on Jack's lap. "Just as someone saved you one day," Mary replied, remembering how the cycle of protection and healing perpetuates through generations. Tommy's graduation from the University of Texas, 4 years later, was celebrated with a party at the ranch that gathered over 300 people, domestic violence survivors, families helped by the center, academic colleagues, and local authorities. The 21-year-old gave an emotional speech about how growing up in a family dedicated to protecting others shaped his decision to become a public prosecutor, specializing in domestic crimes. Sarah, now 23 and a registered nurse, worked at the center as a psychological first aid coordinator, her 4-year-old son playing happily with the other children in the flower-filled yard. Jack, at 69, watched the crowd gathered under the party lights strung between the ancient trees and felt deep satisfaction seeing how a single courageous decision had multiplied into hundreds of transformed lives. Mary, recognized by the governor of Texas as Woman of the Year for her pioneering work, held her husband's hand and whispered, "Look how many people found hope because you had the courage to say, 'This ends today.'" Soft country music echoed through the starry night as 3 generations celebrated not just a graduation, but the continuation of a legacy of protection and love. At 75, Jack Turner had become a revered figure in Texas, honored by the state for his years of dedication to the cause of women victims of violence. Mary, at 68, had written an autobiographical book that became required reading in social work courses nationwide. Tommy, now a public prosecutor for 5 years, had secured the conviction of 127 domestic abusers, becoming known as the prosecutor who never gives up. Sarah directed a national foundation named the Jack Turner Hope Project, funding support houses in rural states where resources were scarce. On a golden autumn afternoon, while watching Sarah's grandchildren play in the same yard where Tommy grew up, Jack reflected on the power of individual choices to shape collective destiny. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had driven past your house that afternoon," he said, adjusting the cowboy hat he had worn for decades. Mary smiled, her hair now completely silver, shining under the Texas sun. "But you didn't drive past, Jack. And that's the difference between ordinary men and true heroes. Heroes stop when someone needs help." The gentle wind carried the scent of the last flowers of the season, reminding them that even at the end of all seasons, there are always seeds planted for new beginnings, and that a single courageous sentence can echo through time, saving lives not yet born.